So, let's brainstorm a GODHUSK inspired tabletop character with mechanics and supplements and stuff like that. So, what do I mean? Tabletop? What's that? I know what a table is, and I know what the top of something is. TTRPG? Tabletop games are where you roll dice, make characters, imagine, narrate, improvise, and fight your way through fantasy realms and other settings. It's D&D, but there are other ones because, ever since Wizard of the Coast started to kind of run this Pinkerton simulator thing, Monster of the Week, Morkborg, Mothership, Liminal Horror, they feed on fear and many more spooky and accessible and utterly charming role-playing games are available and all perfect for newbies and veterans alike. That being said, of course, I cannot deny a good D&D sesh, and that's where I started. Just because Wizards is doing some sort of digital AI age, which is much ick. I can't deny a beloved system, and if we can cram some grimy, pipe-laden, rusty kind of angel evolution stuff into that, then, hey, awesome. So, with that said, I thought maybe you and I could spitball some super basic, system-agnostic kind of stuff to use in tabletop games for ourselves, to play within Plastiboo's GODHUSK world. For those of you who don't know, I'm Haunted Picnic. I'm the guy that reviews GODHUSK, the game booklet by Plastiboo. So think of me like the Tenmu equivalent of Vardy. I do game lore, but I do it a bit more vaguely. I'm kind of like a goblin. I creep around in the more stranger areas, the darker wires, and hiss at anything that passes by before I scurry back into the safety of my shadowy pit. And it is this pit that you and I can travel through and find some ideas and inspiration, good vibes and concepts for our tabletop experience. So, what are some of the elements that would help us make and integrate a GODHUSK style character for a role-playing game? So we're thinking, what gives that GODHUSK feeling? It's grimy body horror stuff, junkyard, kind of punk aesthetics, apocalyptic, religious zealotry. There's a lot going on. We're going to need limb mechanics, aka replacing, attaching, and changing limbs. We're going to need pseudo-body horror stuff. Also, more vessels, more androids, more robots than humans. So that's probably the character that our players, or us, will play. And the understanding that the origins of this character, or this sort of style of character, comes from a sprawling underground apocalyptic world with secretive factions and fungal horrors. So, let's start with the super basics. Let's just do some flavor text. Health, red bile, white bile is mana, magic, or some sort of action resource that you can use to spend. And maybe mem units are currency. So that's easy enough to just flip the words around for that. So, no matter the system, our player is also a vessel. That's their class. Well, not so much class. That's their that's their race. That's their background. Instead of a dragonborn, it's a vessel. This character is a vessel, but there's differences within. So, with that being said, if you're a vessel, that all-important thing, limb changing, head, left arm, right arm, legs, all replaceable. Instead of weapons and armor, players are able to find, trade, and equip limbs that function as weapons and modes of movement, armor. Not only that, they could give certain buffs and debuffs. So let's do some quick fire kind of basic limb categories and benefits, negatives, just to see how that might work. So through this, we'll also establish some simple categories within there to use down the track. head. For the head, the brain, this limb, although, technically not a limb, but for this sake it is, what would changing the head of your character allow? It could increase armor or give specific resistances. It could increase mental acuity or skills. Stats like intelligence and wisdom may come from there. It may be more sort of, like vision, night vision. Maybe you can see divine beings, or thermal vision, that kind of thing. Negative costs could be classic lower armor, or maybe impaired vision. Maybe these vision benefits truly restrict you in the same sense that you can see through walls, but you can't see anything else, or cold things. Maybe it could be playing off that sort of thing, that by changing the heads, you're changing memories or sort of little tweaks in the personality traits. You see things as altered, maybe where before you see certain bodies of water, you actually see blood for whatever reason. This is all just sort of flavor conjecture, that kind of thing. But hey, who knows? Just have fun with that. The arms. The arms are our bread and butter weapons, my friend. Left and right arms can be anything, but I feel like, for simplicity's sake, streamline this. Arms are predominantly weapons, and they have a variety of functions, but let's say 3 mainly. Now, the weapons can be broken up into ranged or melee, so swords, axes, clubs, that kind of thing, and then guns, laser cannons, maybe a crossbow, who knows. With the functions, the 3 categories for how each of these weapons may function or any benefits that they provide is: do they do damage, do they have defense capabilities, or are they able to do utility purposes? So these would be the 3 main focuses that each weapon, doesn't necessarily have to have all 3 or 1. Could just be a weapon that does damage. But these would be the 3 categories to consider when making these different arms. The hands have a great amount of utility, and the fun kind of negative positive of having replaceable limbs is that, some limbs may not actually be good for standard things that in other systems normal people could do. Your D&D human fighter is always probably going to be able to open a door with his fingers on his hand, but in this case, maybe our benefit is that the very weak damage dealing claw that we have is actually much better for complex, finger, sleight of hand sort of stuff. So you'd be better at stealing or, hacking, lockpicking, that sort of thing. And of course, who could forget? The staple of any sort of arm-based weapon is literally just a cannon arm. So other end of the spectrum, no fingers. Not very good utility, but it is a freaking cannon on your arm. Your whole arm is a weapon, so huge damage. Now, speaking of cannons as well, I'm not sure how everyone else plays. Me, pretty fast and loose, but also I'm not really much for ammo. Unless it's like a super survival horror thing, go for it. That's sort of part and parcel, but I think I just enjoy weapons doing the damage that they do, and if you have a bow, I'm just going to assume you have arrows. Now, if you want ammo in your game or for using a GODHUSK character, please feel free. Just for me, I'm a no ammo kind of guy. I feel like where the management part of it comes from is actually swapping arms for the best weapon, or swapping limbs in general for the best situation and adapting to that, and then weighing up, do I change to this arm now, or maybe if I use this arm, does it destroy itself but it's incredibly powerful, and combining those sort of things. So speaking of which, head, arms, our final little piece, legs. So same as the arms, but with them having a bit more of a standardized utility-based style to them, because legs are somewhat, I would argue, synonymous with movement, so it makes sense for us to kind of stick with that function, and obviously we'll have weapon legs as well, but legs are predominantly in the category of altering player movement. So 2 types of legs: fast and slow. I know that's a little crazy, let me finish. Regular is an option, it just has no intrinsic benefit beyond just standard legs, which are pretty good, but hey, fast legs, they usually allow better movement, jumping, dodging, either increases to stats or actual feats to it, maybe a double jump, that kind of thing. Whereas slow legs are, as you may have guessed, more tanky and powerful, or they have more unique movement options to them. So whereas the fast legs implies agility, the slow legs may actually allow flight, which is arguably more mobile in some senses than the fast ones, but when you're not flying, you're slow. So, fighting, climbing, jumping, digging, these are all things that the legs could possibly do. And also, of course, damage. There's kicking. There's just being a weapon too. Blade leg, who knows? Maybe, hell, you could have legs that fly by shooting. So they're just constantly firing bullets into the ground. Powered by collateral damage, I imagine. So that also brings me to another aspect, which I will dig into in a moment. But what happens when you have one leg that's different to the other? So one fast, one slow. And what happens when you have different limb sets? Maybe there's a group vessel thing. When you have the full set of something, it confers it allows a even better bonus. Who knows? With that all said, how do we balance the chaos of mishmashing a bunch of limbs? So, for legs, because generally they're always going to give some sort of bonus or alteration to movement, or they're more of an ability-based thing, I would say here's how this goes. Heads effects are universal, but generally passive. They're not an active thing that you choose to do. They're just sort of in effect. However, of course, you could if you want. Legs function regardless as well. However, their effect is either halved, or a roll is required to actually do an ability if you have mix and match legs. So, if both fast or slow, you're good to go. If one fast, one slow, you're going to need a roll. Now, I also haven't forgotten that this is GODHUSK, and all limbs can be used in any slots. You could literally just be a torso, a head, and then 4 legs. So you'd just be really good running. And I think, maybe haven't got that there just yet, but I think that simply must be allowed because it's too hilarious and crazy not to. So we need to do that. And so let's say same rule applies. It just means that it might cost something or be a roll. So, you still have access to the abilities and you've got 4 of them. It's just going to be maybe a harder roll number to hit, or you actually need to expend white bile, mana, or some resource, maybe in your action economy, to do so. But you can do it. The other thing is that limb switching in and out, and players will be able to change limbs, but also, we need to ask and answer 2 very important questions. Can players keep or store limbs for later? Inventory, i.e. And can they take the limbs off any other vessels or enemies? Both of these questions need to be asked and answered. Especially the latter, because 100% of the time, if you fight someone cool who has cool stuff, you're going to be like, I want that sword on my arm. And you should be able to do that. So this is a personal preference for me, but I think limbs should be changed on the fly. The book, like GODHUSK, it feels more like that's the survival horror element, or it's scrappy. That's the apocalyptic part of it, that you need to switch in and out and change yourself to adapt to different situations as you go. So I would say yes to taking limbs from enemies, but no to storing. Can it be all enemies? maybe. I would argue that you could take an organic person's limb, but most of the time it's not going to work that great, or be regular or standard, unless the GM specifies otherwise. And you shouldn't be able to store limbs. However, that being said, players 95% of the time usually have an inventory, and that's a good idea in most TTRPGs, depending on what style it is. So if we have to, it may also be easier for the GM to keep track of things. Let's say that you can hold one limb at a time in your inventory on standby. You can switch it in and out. That will keep things kind of a bit more restrictive and tough, and encourage switching in and out, as opposed to just like stockpiling the best and then never using anything else. Maybe there is a sort of durability thing that is often a contentious mechanic in things. I sometimes do not like that. Now, with all that being said, this would be an insane amount of information for a GM to keep track of, and an alarming amount of ligaments and anatomical devices. So let's just say GMs out there, or us, when we're creating our kind of player, let's just write down a bunch. Think of maybe 10 of each. 10 left arm, 10 right arm, leg, head, and just think about the fun abilities that you would want. And maybe this is something you can incorporate into your game, or pitch to your GM and be like, listen, if this works in your world, or if you're doing a crazy one-shot, here's what I'm looking at, and then talk about balancing that stuff. So balancing that sort of thing would probably be like, I tend to do the scale, and when I say scale, I mean like literally a set of scales, as in if you really want one thing, just add that other shitty little, add that other negative element to it, which can also be kind of fun, like, you've got your weapon that does super crazy damage, but then blows you back, like the recoil is crazy. Or maybe you have a weapon that has absolutely no damage, is just purely utility, but it's like a 3D printing arm, and you can recreate imitations of certain objects or key items, maybe keys, but they break, stuff like that. Those sort of things. And just a list of 10 each, or that kind of thing. Think about legs and movement. What are different methods of movement? What's good, what's bad for them? And and then once you got that list down, figure out what system you're playing. Talk to your GM, talk to yourself, and figure out what that would equate to. Maybe a cannon in D&D. It could be a cannon arm, etc. So, with that rapid fire stuff out of the way, what makes our GODHUSK player character unique? Because we've talked about the elements that make it a GODHUSK style character, which is based around this limb mechanic idea, this sort of flavoring of weapons and stuff. But everyone else in these systems, they have rich backstories and drives, classes. And so you too should be able to have that with your GODHUSK character. The pathway, the drive, the inherited will that you have, that is your class, and that's the role that you serve. So what I've got here is just some quick little, again, flavor flips of some GODHUSK inspired kind of stuff. Here's 6 class starting points based on the old classic archetypal fantasy system classes. So, our fighter, the burdened. Our paladin, the engineer of mercy. Wizard, sage. Cleric, divine redeemer. Rogue, the serpent. And your druid or bard is the crust molder. So, here's just a little bit of quick lore background on each of these classes, and then I'll go into some just general little feats or stats that they might have. But of course, this is all just groundwork format stuff for you to build upon or add your own ideas to. So, the burdened. Spawned from the last functioning nursery, a vessel is born whose purpose is undefined. They walk a path of uncertainty, but in doing so are granted the burden of choice in all things. The blank canvas, upon which everything is possible, great and terrible as that may be. They are overlooked by other, more defined vessels, but welcomed warmly by their simple constructed kin. A humble beginning of many branching pathways. So the burdened is your standard human fighter. They would start with extra health and mana, red bar white. They can change limbs maybe as a free action, that's easy, or like pick up and switch out weapon limbs, easy. And they start with a random leg and arm to begin with. So everything else is regular, and then roll on a table of your list of 10 of each, and then you get to start with a random sort of thing. So they're your stock standard preset 1 protagonist kind of class. Now for our paladin, the engineer of mercy. There are those who strayed when Obek's light began to dwindle. The faith in its return must be held aloft, and the word of Obek must echo on despite the putrid corruption that now seems to sway this world. You are a vessel of mercy to those whose existence would be better served in absence, spared from an eternity without Obek's light. You repair the lost, and you construct the noose of wires in which all traitors will hang. So, our super severe paladin, the engineer of mercy, could have a ability where they can recover a certain amount of mana, or like a dice amount, upon killing a known opposer of Obek, or what is essentially like a heretic or an apostate of their faith. So you can kind of flavor it. It could be other pre-existing gods or religions, and it doesn't have to necessarily be Obek specifically, but aligning to your vessel beliefs. Maybe you could recover a bit of something when you murder a known heretic. Head limbs can detach from your body and be piloted a remote amount of distance, sort of a scanning thing, because you're very much just sort of like a bit of a witch hunter style kind of paladin that you're tracking down traitors. So your head can, no matter what style of head as well, maybe you have a once a day ability where it can just sort of drone its way around a certain area or distance and then return. But your body would be, vulnerable. And maybe you have, +1 to melee damage. Just a classic. Just like melee limbs, you're good at. Our next is the switch for the wizard, which is the sage. Now, I know I said wizard. This is maybe a bit more of a monk character, to be perfectly honest. But, depending on what kind of abilities you want to give it, I think it would fit here, or perhaps with the druid replacement. But, wizard, monk, keep that in mind. The sage. The crimson tide undulates at the outer layers of this world. You strayed into the Scythian wastelands, and instead of destruction, you found a growing sense of purpose. Slow as they move, so do you, gaining understanding and knowledge of beings beyond yourself and that which gave you life. You walk among them and walk for them, where they cannot tread or defend their own purpose. So the sage has the ability to calm Scythian life as an action, or maybe they have advantage, or it's a one-day ability. And Scythian life, obviously, replacement for any sort of fungal, or it could be plant-based, but primarily fungal life. You can inflict basic damage with any limb, even the ones that don't do damage, because you are this sort of sage, very much inspired by like martial arts monk style figures, but in the wizard kind of way. Maybe it's more of any limb can do a very little bit of damage, but it would be elemental, like electric or something like that. And I suppose more of this is more me as a shout out to the book. If you only have one arm, it does double damage, but you can only have one arm limb for that ability to be the case. So yeah. Our next one is the classic cleric, the divine redeemer. So, through you, the reach of the divine extends. You are barely a vessel, as in your own eyes, you are but a conduit to forces beyond and above, to ease the ailing and to redeem those who have fallen from a halo's glow. So, very angel-based. The divine redeemer is your healer. You can spend white bile to recover red bile, but it's like a 2-to-1 kind of thing. But you always have access to that to heal yourself or others. You're allowed to collect tears from NPCs in the exchange for rerolls. So it's almost like you can get inspiration from anyone who's crying, but they need to legitimately be crying about something sad. And you can't make them cry, like hit them and they go, ugh. They need to actually produce tears from an emotional pain, because that's sort of what the book seems to suggest. This is how and from who you collect these tears from. And then also you have angelic guidance kind of thing. So it's more like detect good and evil, but this is, you can sense ill intent from people, vessels and things, except gods and divine beings, because you just believe in them. You don't want to know what they're about because you know it's probably good. So you can't actually sense angelic beings. You just assume they're there. But the ill intention of others, you can. Now, rogue switch is the serpent. To deceive a deceiver is no small task, but it is that task you have adopted in your own way. To prevent the return of a divine being's rule is your charge. Trained deep beneath the dome hideout, you perfected your craft skills and willpower. Your aims are your own, but your task remains eternal. Adorn red, spill red, defy heaven, and obscure old lies with new ones. So we got our classic sneaky kind of attacking damage style rogue, except it's based on the snake or the serpent from GODHUSK. So you have no negative effects for using a slow and a fast leg. Any basic or non-damage arm limbs automatically gain poison blade. So sort of what I was saying with the sage is that any limb that would do no damage can do poison damage upon hit, but maybe it's very small or it's more of a over time sort of thing. And you have advantage to deception and stealth stuff, just very classic things. And obviously you can build more on that. Maybe there is literally a vine whip style thing with wires, something to do with red, but yeah. Our final one is the Druid. The Druid, or sort of bard replacement, definitely more Druid here, is the Crust Molder. My personal favorite. So the Crust Molder. You began in the crust, molded by it, spewed forth from misplaced arcs onto a red earth. The land took you quickly, and together you became one. You do feel the need to earn Scythian love and respect, for you are among them. They do as they do, and you wield them, for you are able. Though you walk a half-life as a pod spawn, you breathe the hematomal meadows air with ease. I've definitely said that wrong, but the crust molder, half vessel, half crust. You are immune to polyps and breathing effects of poison, diseases, gas, that kind of thing. your vessel, the torso, has a built-in ranged corrosive spore blaster. So once per day, causes corrosion, area of effect, and it takes time for you to actually recover from that. But you can fire that from your body, and it would be hidden or disguised. No one would necessarily be able to anticipate that. And you can also summon a tiny kib, which is a crab from the book in GODHUSK, which I don't think I've shown, but as a little familiar that can help you out, or that kind of thing, and maybe there's instead of create or destroy water, there's create or destroy crust. You can just make crust structures. These are all obviously, again, just quick fire workshop brainstormy stuff. But that help you from there to give you some ideas about how you might have a GODHUSK tabletop character. These have all been very rough around the edges sort of stuff. I've been thinking about it. I saw some of you had been posting about, interested in kind of like D&D games from these sort of things, and it's always cool to find new things to be inspired by, to then kind of want to, experience in that way. And, tabletop stuff is awesome. I really like it. If any of you guys have any ideas, thoughts, your own limbs, or maybe your own class, let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe. I'm told that that's good. But no, I really appreciate it. And if you do actually run or try out a GODHUSK inspired tabletop game setting or character, definitely let me know, because I'd love to know how that goes, how you found it, that vessel life. Anyway, this has been a long rambling video. Thank you for coming along for the ride, and I've been Haunted Picnic. See you next time.